Hello everyone, I'm Lynn Trong with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Co-Location of Solar and Agriculture, Benefits and Trade-offs of Low-Impact Solar Development Approaches. We are excited to have Jordan Macnick, Rob Davis, and Laura Caspari join us today. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You can either listen through your computer or telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. By doing so, we'll eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you select the telephone option, you should already see a box on the right-hand side that will display the telephone number and audio pin. Panelists, we ask that you please mute your audio device while you are not presenting. If you have any technical difficulties with the webinar, you can contact the GoToWebinar's help desk for assistance. Throughout the webinar today, you're welcome to ask a question. Please use the questions pane to type in that question. If you're having any difficulties today, we are recording the webinar, and that recording is available. And now for today's presentation. Our webinar today is Co-Location of Solar and Agriculture, Benefits and Trade-offs of Low-Impact Solar Development Approaches. Our first speaker today is Jordan, Energy and Environmental Analyst at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'd like to welcome Jordan to start today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you to all who are joining us today. I think this is going to be a great webinar, a great opportunity to talk about some of these emerging issues, and I'm also excited that we have multiple perspectives that you'll be hearing from today, both from the research and scientific angle from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, as well as from a solar industry perspective from Socor Energy, and then also from a nonprofit perspective with Fresh Energy. And I think we're going to have a lot of different perspectives that are going to be going around. We'll be covering a lot of information, but hopefully it'll be digestible for you all. And again, we will be having time at the end for questions, so we look forward to answering questions from you. So some of the main motivation of this work and of this topic is the fact that we are seeing an unprecedented rise in the development of solar energy throughout the U.S. and its development that we're expected to see continue greatly going forward. And while we are certainly promoting the development and the deployment of rooftop solar development, there's a limit on the total amount of roof space in the United States for solar development, which means we're going to have to be moving into ground-mounted solar systems. And these ground-mounted solar systems really will be targeted all throughout the United States. And so what we're seeing is the use of land all around the United States for solar development between now and 2030, as well as 2050. And what we're addressing today are some of the issues that arise when you locate solar projects on lands, in particular agricultural lands. Another motivation for this work is that in the past, typical conventional solar development has involved activities that involve removing vegetation, flattening ground, etc., that lead to landscapes such as what you see in the figures here, which are completely devoid of vegetation. These activities also involve the use of heavy machinery that come onto the site to remove that vegetation, to flatten that ground, etc. Which means that these activities, these site preparation activities, are expensive with a lot of capital and labor costs. The Department of Energy anticipates that by the year 2020, 1/5 of all the installed solar costs will be just for these site preparation activities that remove that vegetation. So what we're exploring in this effort is how we can potentially remove the need for that heavy machinery, remove the need for that for getting rid of the vegetation in such a way that we can reduce the site preparation costs, in some cases very substantially, and then also find a way in which we can promote solar development that really encourages vegetation, encourages habitat of different sorts, encourages co-location with agricultural operations. And so this is really the driving motivation behind this work, is we would like to see more opportunities for solar projects to incorporate vegetation, to co-locate with agricultural operations in such a way that we are benefiting soils, benefiting ground cover, as well as meeting all the needs of the solar industry. So this is what we're terming low-impact solar development. And there's a lot more detail we could get into when we talk about low-impact solar development and low-impact site preparation. This table here highlights some of the key features. In conventional site preparation, again, you're removing soil and roots, you're stripping the topsoil, grading the land, compacting the soil. You're going to have an increased land footprint for the vertical support structures. You generally remove all vegetation, and your own are also focused on removing that vegetation. In the low-impact site preparation work, we actually want to leave the existing vegetation. We want to encourage low-height native vegetation and preserve that soil, and if we can, actually improve the soil quality of that land by the use of the different types of vegetation that we might include, such as, for example, legumes, which might help improve the nitrogen content of the soil, for example. We think we can also reduce the total land footprint and other land impacts, and as well as improve the stormwater management of those sites. And because there are so many different variations of what low-impact site development is, we have categorized low-impact solar development into 3 categories. One is solar-centric, a second is vegetation-centric, and a third is co-location. And we'll go through these in more detail, but solar-centric approaches essentially require minimal changes to the solar configuration, and you find ways in which you can include vegetation without really affecting the solar operations. In the vegetation-centric approach, it's the opposite, where you really have no change to your vegetation or agricultural operations, and you just find ways in which you can incorporate solar here and there without affecting your vegetation or agricultural operations. In the co-location approach, however, this is where you co-optimize both your solar configuration as well as your vegetation management, and so this involves unique and innovative science and solar technologies, as well as vegetation or agricultural practices to make this happen. This will be much easier as we go through some examples and some pictures. And so here's one first example of a solar-centric approach, and this is actually on the National Renewable Energy Lab's campus. This work has been ongoing since 2010, led by our lead biologist, Brenda Beatty, which is evaluating how different types of native vegetation species can grow underneath a utility-scale solar project. And in this case, we've looked at a number of different types of vegetation, subject to different types of treatments, and to see how they perform under your standard utility-scale solar project. In another example, we can look at the California Valley Solar Ranch as a project that is looking at how endangered species could be affected by solar developments, and how the efforts from solar projects could potentially have positive or negative impacts on that endangered species habitat. In the more vegetation-centric approach, we can look at this example from Wisconsin, where we see sunflowers being grown, and the solar panels are being placed in different spots around the land, not really affecting the growth of those sunflowers, but just put in clever locations. As another example, in the West, you have many center pivot irrigation systems for agriculture, which means you have a lot of agricultural land that is not actually being irrigated or being utilized for crop production. So we've evaluated how you could put solar panels in those unused portions, and this could be a corollary to the low-value land pieces of existing agricultural land. So again, this is a case where you're not reducing agricultural output at all. You're just finding unique places to put solar on that agricultural land. And then we get into solar and agricultural co-location. And I think a great example of this is the University of Massachusetts co-location test facility, which is run by Dr. Stephen Herbert there. And at this facility, you have a series of elevated solar panels with varying spaces in between the panels, where they're conducting research on how different types of agricultural crops or the vegetation perform underneath the solar panels, which are subject to different amounts of shading throughout the day, depending on their height and the spacing in between panels. And this summer, there was some exciting research happening there where there started out with grass. There's Dr. Stephen Herbert right there. Started out with some grass there, but that was removed in order to plant a variety of different crops, such as Swiss chard and kale and broccoli and peppers and beans, where the crops were planted underneath the panels, again, subject to different spacings between the panels, as well as a control group. You can see from when it was harvested that the plants performed, the crops performed pretty well under all the different types of spacings. And then since then, there's been, the harvesting has led to the data collection and the weighing, wet and dry weight of these crops to see how they actually perform subject to the different spacing in between the panels. And I can get into more detail on some of the preliminary results of this, but it's very encouraging for the co-location of agriculture and solar on a practical basis. Another example of co-location of solar and agriculture is evident with ranching and grazing activities. You can see sheep are very, very popular in Europe as well as in North Carolina and other parts of the U.S. For managing vegetation underneath solar panels. And then you can see cattle are also content with the elevated solar panels in Massachusetts as well. We've performed some other research. The project team has performed some other research in other countries looking at this topic. And so in India, we have evaluated how aloe vera crops would perform in a co-location setup. We've also looked at the growth of agave in the desert southwest in the U.S. as well as in Mexico. And it doesn't stop there. I think almost in any place you can have bees that are that can be, and bee growing operations that can be done in conjunction with solar projects. And then finally, we have other benefits from having vegetation around and near solar projects and farms. You can see that the presence of vegetation, the presence of flowers, can help with the diversity of bees and other insects that serve a function to pollinate crops. Now, in the indoor space, we are working with Soliculture, a company that is looking at innovative greenhouse technologies that actually are able to produce electricity while also letting light in to grow different crops. And so here's another innovative way in which we can merge solar and agriculture in this context. So some of the things that we've come across with all these different case studies that we've been evaluating, all the different examples that we've seen throughout Europe as well as the United States, is that there's a number of benefits for co-location, both to the landowners and agricultural operators, as well as to the solar developers. Things like additional revenue for the landowners, the compatibility of these technologies with their existing operations, a new market for shade-tolerant crops, improvements to the soil related to erosion, health, and soil moisture, as well as the improved benefit for pollinator species. At the same time, when we look at what this means for solar developers, we can see a decrease in site preparation costs, reduction in O&M costs, reduced need for dust suppression or for watering, for cleaning panels, as well as some potential impacts resulting from a cooler microclimate underneath the panels. Now, these are all benefits that we've heard about and benefits that people are talking about from this. as part of this, this research effort that NREL is undertaking, what we are doing is actually taking all these claims and trying to provide scientifically rigorous data to back up and evaluate these claims to better understand what are the potential benefits of co-location, as well as what are the costs and other potential trade-offs associated with these activities. So again, what we're trying to do right now with the Department of Energy is actually evaluate in a very systematic way what is and characterize what is low-impact site development. What are the different variations of low-impact site development that countries have, or that companies have implemented throughout the country? What kinds of reductions in environmental impacts and reductions in costs have they seen? A key component of this is also then looking at how can we, if there are environmental impacts, how can we improve our ability to mitigate those impacts through regional mitigation planning and compensatory mitigation planning in terms of purchasing additional lands in such a way that we're really capturing the best benefits to landscapes and to habitats on a much larger scale. And then finally, we are looking at innovative siting locations, which includes test plots of co-location of agriculture and solar, as well as the development of solar on contaminated and disturbed lands throughout the U.S. This work is involving a lot of stakeholder engagement for data collection, for results validation, for dissemination, as well as just getting a lot of feedback on what works for different types of landowners, what works for farmers, what works for solar developers, etc. And as part of this effort, again, we are conducting field studies in a number of different locations throughout the U.S., desktop studies evaluating how shade might affect different crop performance. We're looking at regional variations. We're looking at variations in solar configurations and differences in the types of vegetation that are used and how they might perform under these special conditions. Again, a key part of this is evaluating costs. So how do O&M costs change? How do initial costs change? How does solar performance change? And we're hoping that this will really contribute to improved long-term planning and the co-development of solar and agriculture in the future. Our project team is wonderful. We are partnering with Argonne National Laboratory, as well as 2 university partners, the University of Massachusetts and Temple University, and 2 industry partners, Soliculture and Hyperion Systems, in these activities. And we have test plots located throughout the United States. It is something that we are excited to be working on, and something that we are also actively looking for additional partners if there are any interested agricultural operators or solar developers out there that are interested in this topic and are wanting to help contribute to the scientific study of this topic. And so before I pass this off to Laura, I just want to say this was a sort of a whirlwind tour of what low-impact solar development is and what co-location of agriculture and solar can mean. But I think the important thing is that it means a variety of different things, and what we want to do is make sure for each location, each place we're at, we're really looking at ways in which we can make sure we are improving agriculture operations as well as meeting solar development needs as well. We are always looking to work more with additional stakeholders, with people that are interested in this, and we think that we can really only through working with all those different people, different stakeholders, can we make sure that our activities really benefit all stakeholders and improve agricultural operations and improve the opportunities for solar to be deployed throughout the U.S. So with that, I will pass it over to Laura Caspari from Socor Energy. Laura?
Hi everyone, this is Laura Caspari, Director of Development with Socor Energy. I'm also here with Gavin Mindshine from our civil engineering team. And I want to give a specific example of a project that we've been constructing in Wisconsin, which does follow the approach of planting native vegetation and, in fact, pollinator gardens beneath the array. So you'll see on this slide a little bit of a snapshot of the project. It was with Dairyland Power. They went out for an RFP, I believe it was in late 2015, when we were selected to build 13 megawatts of distributed ground-mounted solar sites across 11 different locations in western Wisconsin. The procurement was since expanded, so now I believe it's up to around 20 megawatts. And SoCore Energy is a wholly owned subsidiary of Edison International, who are a Fortune 500 energy holding company. And so this is a serious utility scale development that has been financed and has been built and has incorporated environmentally friendly native vegetation and pollinator garden practices. So I think it's a really great example of what Jordan's been talking about that's been put into practice in the commercial marketplace and is not a test facility of any kind of nature. So you can see a list here of the different seed mixes used at a variety of sites that we built in 2016. If we go to the next slide. Can we go to the, yep, great. So this just gives a summary of how many acres this actually means for pollinator gardens. So we're at about 150 acres of native pollinator habitat, completely seeded with, or will be completely seeded by the time it's finished, obviously being winter right now, with appropriate mixes of native vegetation tailored to that location and pollinator habitat. So this would be the equivalent to 92,000 homes having a standard 6x12 pollinator garden. So it's a very significant effort, and we think it's going to provide an economic benefit to our operations and maintenance of the sites in addition to the serious environmental benefits. If we go to the next slide. This goes into a list of the wildflower mixes used in each of the different zones. Did you want to?
Yeah, I guess what we did specifically is kind of examine each site based on its local, its actual location, and then also on the soil conditions, the moisture level in the, across the site, varying types of soil, varying locations, and really chose 3 different mixes that kind of worked well in those different situations. And so really pinpointed what mixes would work well on each location. And as you kind of flip through and see the different slides, like we just kind of, we wanted to kind of provide you with the different lists so you could see how different and how diverse the different mixes are for the different situations. And so they all may be on one single project, or we may have, it's really just dependent specifically on where we were developing.
Great. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the benefits to this. Okay, so the species selected were tolerant of changing sun exposures and resilient to the variable climate and suitable to the climate in the specific location. Also, the stormwater infiltration was extremely increased. I think Rob's going to talk about in the next section. That was a really big benefit as we need to go through a stormwater permitting process for each of these projects. Related to that, to improve the quality of stormwater runoff. Also, the maintenance of the sites. Instead of going out and mowing turf grass on a very, very regular basis, these specific species are a lower growth native vegetation, and so the cost of us operating and maintaining this project for 25 plus years is actually significantly lower than it would be with turf grass. And that was a very serious economic benefit to us in selecting these species. It also reduces the need to use pesticides to control weeds, deters growth of non-native species, and creates a pollinator habitat to support bees and butterflies and other insects. And in specific to Wisconsin, frost heave was a concern with our engineering design, and the root system of these plants helped insulate against that. We're also, in addition to Wisconsin, doing this on a project in Iowa, which is part of the same rollout. And when we went through our permitting process and the zoning hearings in Iowa for that project, the fact that we were doing a pollinator garden on top of the solar project actually was really, really well received in the hearings, showing photos like the one up on this slide right now, and talking about these kind of benefits gained a lot of traction with the local city and the local the neighbors and the people who are involved in permitting this project, and it was much, much more well received than previously when we gone into other meetings and did not have that as part of the project development. And we're also planning to expand our use of native vegetation and pollinator mixes in many other states throughout the country: Maryland, Kansas, Texas, Minnesota, and others as well. So we see this as a really exciting development and something that has both environmental and economic benefits to us. I think that was my last slide, and we're going to pass it on to Rob now.
Great, and thanks so much, Laura, and thank you, Enrel, thank you, Gavin, for hosting this important conversation. I think it's very timely, and we're glad to share best practices and experiences from what we've learned so far on this subject. So I'm Rob Davis. I'm at a nonprofit organization, Fresh Energy. We shape and drive clean energy policy, and have seen that we got into this business, I guess, this topic, because Minnesota is scaling incredibly rapidly in its growth of solar. And we recognize that this, as a standard practice, would cause significant alarm in our agricultural communities. Folks in Minnesota, and I know folks throughout the agricultural industry, believe strongly in the productive use of agricultural lands. So particularly when you take this approach, and I look at it every time, but I look at how close that mower is to the edge of that solar panel, and then you multiply it by 25 years, it definitely prompts a person to think there must be a better way. So thinking very carefully and intentionally about that, we came up with a set of performance guidelines for solar site vegetation. And these align with a lot of the bullets that Laura had previously highlighted, that the vegetation, rather than just go out and buy the cheapest grass that's available and do the thing that is in our front lawns or in our front yards, is to be as thoughtful about the vegetation that goes onto these sites as we are about the solar, about the glass and the steel and the circuitry. And so to design a vegetation mix that's resistant to droughts, downpours, that provides risk against frost heave, that's a situation where the ground freezes and thaws and actually pushes the footings up out of the ground, is low maintenance, low growing, and provides significant agricultural benefits in the form of pollinator vegetation. So those benefits can be highlighted here in terms of reduced O&M costs, reduced mowing after the vegetation has a period of establishment. And instead of, it's really just rethinking, like, should we be sending mowers onto these sites every 6 to 8 weeks, or should we be doing more low impact approaches that have people doing a different kind of maintenance that reduces the opportunity for big mowers to hit panels and have those kind of collision events. So sites that also have significant pollinator benefits are very attractive to corporate buyers, corporations that are interested in highlighting their brand and touting the fact that they are at or near 100% renewable electricity, may also be very interested in having beautiful photos of bumblebees and monarch butterflies in and around their solar arrays. The stormwater performance of these deep-rooted plants is definitely superior to turf grass. There's a lot of research that's been done out of Wisconsin and Madison area showing that. And this is definitely a significant opportunity when we're building and establishing an asset into a community for a period of 25 years, making sure that that local community is going to drive by that solar array and be glad that it's there. So, local beekeepers, local farmers, that when people see these solar arrays, that they see a beautiful meadow and not something that they have a negative reaction to that strikes them as a industrial use. So at a national level, 2 years ago, the White House pulled together a panel of experts across the country and did a huge analysis and found that the honeybee alone adds more than $15 billion of agricultural value each year. And they announced a series of steps encouraging the establishment of more acres of pollinator habitat. So pollinators obviously are the insects that spread pollen between crops. And so here's a really concrete example of fruits and vegetables that you may or may not want to eat based on the amount of pollination they've had. So fruits and vegetables are more or less saleable, have greater or lower yields based on whether they are poorly or well pollinated. So you can see the strawberry, for example, on the left is a well-pollinated strawberry and would certainly be available in every food store that you'd visit, and the ones in the middle are would be passed over. Now, in 2013, the Nature Conservancy completed an economic analysis of the contribution that wild pollinators make to 10 major crops. And this is very, because for 10 different major crops, they showed that those blueberries, melons, cucumbers, squash, apples, peaches, they showed a direct increase in gross revenue because of the adjacency of pollinator habitat. This table shows the value of the increase in production attributable directly to wild pollinators and that pollinator habitat. So there's a tremendous opportunity for pollinator habitat on solar arrays to significantly and positively influence the yields of crops that are sited on adjacent land. In fact, in Minnesota in 2016, we seeded and built more than 2,300 acres of pollinator-friendly solar arrays. That's equivalent to 1.4 million homes having a 6-foot by 12-foot pollinator garden, and it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the state's available farmland. Now, what does pollinator-friendly mean is certainly something to be discussed and debated. Does it mean 6 stems of milkweed in front of a 100-acre site? It does not. That would be, but it certainly does not mean a restoration of the site to some native or a wild use. So in 2016, the agricultural leaders in Minnesota got together and established the nation's first vegetation standard for pollinator-friendly solar. This was done by State Rep Rod Hamilton and State Senator Dan Sparks. And as you see in the text below, the bill that they passed basically specifies that an owner of a solar site implementing solar site management practices may claim the site is beneficial to game birds, songbirds, and pollinators only if the vegetation measures up to a particular standard. Now, so the standard was not in law. The standard was handled at the agency level, and the standard was convened with experts including MacArthur Genius Award winner Dr. Marla Spivak, who is kind of like the Michael Jordan of bees, and Monarch Joint Venture director and leader Karen Oberhauser, who concerns herself with everything related to monarch butterflies between Mexico and Canada, and she's kind of the Larry Bird of monarch butterflies. So these scientists and others vetted and weighed in on a establishment of a flexible standard that Minnesota solar developers use to determine whether or not a site can be called pollinator friendly. So this habitat assessment form is certainly something that can be used after a period of years and the vegetation has grown in. And it's also something that can be used at the early stage to think about the seed mix. So an ecologist or an environmental scientist can look at the points available here, percent of site dominated by wildflowers, percent of site dominated by native species, percent of diversity, seasons of blooming. There's a whole variety of ways that this standard can flexibly be applied to make and designed to meet the economics of a project and to meet the particular climate and soil conditions of a given site. The standard was also supported, and the effort on this was led and coordinated by Fresh Energy and Audubon, Minnesota, in significant partnership with the Minnesota Corn Growers Association, Minnesota Farmers Union as well. Now, how did we get into this place? We got into this place because of this. It's increasingly common for folks in rural America to be very concerned about the development of large-scale solar. And that's because images like this one are common in the media. So we are a victim of the success of the dry and arid Southwest, and folks see sites like this and they think that they misconstrue, and they think that maybe PV solar causes damage in some of these lands. In fact, depending on the site development, you can even have a site that has trucked in gravel to cover arable land with gravel underneath and around solar arrays to make these sites look significantly industrial. So there's also a concern about how much space these projects use relative to other agricultural uses. And just to pull out another community and highlight, Maryland, for example, is a community with a very robust agricultural industry, and solar is growing fast there because of some strong public policy that they put in place. But solar will never use more than 2% of the state's available land. Solar crops like corn, soybeans, hay, and wheat, and even vegetables will continue to dominate the agricultural landscape. Now, solar sites developed in this way create more local jobs because you have drill seeders, you have native seed folks, sites planted with native flowers and grasses mean that you have seed growers and seed companies that need to be growing more seed and selling more seed to support the development of solar in these areas. As Laura mentioned, these sites have numerous benefits below the ground in addition to above the ground. So native vegetation is typically measured under the ground in feet rather than in inches. Turf grass goes down 3 to 6 inches, and these are some of the native species that are on sites throughout the Midwest. I want to highlight a couple of different projects that have already been built and are proposed to be built with these characteristics. So for example, a 100 megawatt distributed solar array on 16 sites and covering about 1,000 acres, built by Enel Green Power, maintained by Enel Green Power. The entire site uses a pollinator-friendly seed mix. Also, the largest solar array in the Midwest, 1,000 acres, 100 megawatt solar array. Again, the entire site uses a pollinator-friendly seed mix and was seeded in by a company by the name of Minnesota Native Landscapes. The various colors you see here in the seed mix highlight different blooming seasons for those flowers. In Maryland, OneEnergy Renewables, they're a B corporation, and were voted by the B Corporation folks as a Best in the World award winner for 2015 and 2016. So they've got clearly a lot going for them. They have proposed a site, a 167-acre site in the eastern shore of Maryland that will feature a pollinator-friendly seed mix from Ernst Conservation Seeds. Now this is particularly interesting because this community over the previous winter saw a 60% decline in the honeybee population in that community. And Jordan, I believe OneEnergy is a partner in the NREL study. Do you want to mention that briefly or talk about anything they're going to be doing with monitoring stormwater or water infiltration on the site?
Sure, I'll just chime in very briefly on this. Yeah, OneEnergy is a partner with NREL on this project, and we're going to be looking at basically the different types of pollinator-friendly seed mixes, how they perform in that region. So having specific test plots where we're going to be evaluating the performance of those to really identify which seed mix works the best in that area, which should help future solar development as well as future landowners in that area going forward, in addition to things like stormwater benefits and other soil moisture and soil quality characteristics.
Great, and I really want to highlight OneEnergy for their thoughtfulness on this, because certainly the water quality in the Chesapeake Bay is a topic of great concern, and in this particular community, they happen to be on the eastern shore of Maryland. They happen to have millions and millions of poultry birds are grown, so water quality is a significant issue, and certainly an opportunity for this site to contribute in a positive way. In Minnesota, Minnesota Power and Camp Ripley have a 10 megawatt array, which is the largest on any Army's reserve base. And the entire site, 62 acres, is seeded with a pollinator-friendly seed mix. You can see the variety here from side oats, grandma, to little blue stem buffalo grass, and black-eyed Susans and others. And then Connexus Energy, the largest rural electric co-op in Minnesota, has a beautiful site that they planted and seeded back in 2014. And their leading characteristics that they wanted with the site was visual appeal, because it's adjacent to their headquarters. But their grounds crew also did not want to be going into the site to do maintenance or vegetation management. So they contracted with Prairie Restorations, a regional firm that does vegetation management and seed mix design. And they've been maintaining the site beautifully since in that period of time. They even recognize that pollinators are quite a bit more charismatic than glass and steel and solar panels and wires sometimes. So in their member newsletters, they have highlighted their role as providing pollinator habitat to their members. So this is a membership engagement, and you can see that they're clearly leaning forward on recognizing that pollinators can beneficially influence the way that consumers perceive their brand. And then just a couple of different slides I have just showing pictures of different vegetation mixes and different sites. These are the kinds of photos that I think can get communities welcoming, particularly agricultural communities, welcoming solar, and help provide greater opportunities for co-location of solar and agriculture. That's my last slide, and I thank you for your time.
Great, thanks Rob. Now we're going to be entering into the Q&A portion of the webinar. So we've received a number of questions already, but I want to remind everybody, if you want to ask a question, you can type it in through the interface of the webinar, and we will hopefully get to it. We've had a number of questions so far. The first and foremost question that we had was, will the slides be available, and will a recording of this webinar be available if we want to review? The answer is yes. And so those of you who are participating in this webinar will receive a follow-up email pointing you in the direction of where you can find those slides and where you can find the recording of this webinar. The next question that we have is related to retrofitting an existing solar project. So the question is, if there is a existing solar project that has turf grass or some other vegetation or no vegetation underneath, have there been instances where projects have retrofitted that to implement more pollinator-friendly vegetation? And I think we don't have specific data on the number of projects that have implemented that, but I think it has been of interest. And so this could be something that would be worthy of looking into further if there are people that are operating solar projects that are interested in adopting some sort of pollinator-friendly vegetation mix, whereas currently they might have gravel or turf grass. It's worth exploring to see what it might take to do that retrofitting.
Yeah, and Jordan, I'll chime in on that as well. It's just, I would really encourage anyone that is in that situation to do the math and to get competitive bids from firms that have experience in establishing and maintaining vegetation. So there's a lot of different environmental services firms that service the energy industry. Some of those are now expanding into solar sites. There's already been, there's dozens of firms that have been seeding and establishing prairie and meadow throughout the country for years and years, and have a tremendous amount of experience in addressing just those kinds of questions, because it's not unique to solar. There's a lot of landowners who would like to see, their land use converted. So get quotes, and then be sure you're adding up all the costs on both sides.
Great. And our next question is a question for probably for Laura and her team, which is what motivates a solar company to do this? So this is maybe specifically for SOCOR, why they chose to evaluate these vegetation options at their solar sites.
Yeah, this is Laura. There's a couple of basic reasons for that. We're an owner-operator, so not only do we develop and build these projects, but we own them for 25 plus years. So this is a very long-term asset for us. And part of our analysis of the cost of that asset includes operating that project for that very long period of time, as was well illustrated by Rob's slide of the mower and the 25-year reference. So when we look at the cost of planting the native seeds on the upfront, does cost more than turf grass, but the maintenance every single year, when you pull it out over that 25-year term, is actually lower. So we believe we're going to be saving money on maintenance, weed and vegetation maintenance and mowing. We also see benefits to the stormwater runoff, as I mentioned, in our stormwater permitting process. So when we apply for permits with the likes of the Wisconsin DNR and their equivalents in other states, we find that process is much more favorable if we have the deep root systems of native vegetation. And also when we go through our zoning permitting process and the local permitting authority is evaluating a project, they seem to, and they balance the costs and the benefits of the project. This is one more thing that gets them excited, and they see the pros of the pollinator garden and the native vegetation and the benefits to their local area with stormwater runoff and things of that nature. So those are, I think, the main considerations. And we also believe in being good environmental stewards, but we are a for-profit company, and so we believe that on balance it actually is something that makes economic sense.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, how do, if in cases of co-location of agriculture and solar, how do you avoid, I guess, clipping and other damage to the panels from the farm equipment? And for this question, I think there's a couple of different answers depending on where you are and what types of crops you have. In some areas, you actually will only have hand-harvested crops, and so there you're not really involving a lot of that heavy mowers or heavy machinery going in between the panels. Otherwise, if you do have crops that would require machinery, some sort of equipment going through, I think there the key is to smart design this from the beginning to make sure you have sufficient space in between panel rows and to make sure that the equipment you're going to use will fit in between those spaces appropriately. And I think Rob showed some pictures of people mowing, turf grass in between the panels, and I think it's a similar arrangement there, except you would have, instead of mowing the grass, which would obviously can also kick up rocks that can damage the panels, you're going to be harvesting crops. And so it's one of these cases that's very site dependent, and it's something that requires planning from the beginning to make sure you're designing the solar configuration with the equipment you're going to use in mind.
So I think that's another, just to chime in on that briefly, Jordan, another opportunity I think there is for a landowner or a farmer in that situation to do a calculation regarding, whether they want to be going inside the fence for that particular crop, or whether they see an opportunity to boost the yield of crops that can be sited outside the fence. Certainly crops outside the fence reduce the risk of damaging the glass and have the other meadow characteristics.
Great. The next question is there a comprehensive list of all the installations that have done this and done some sort of co-location, and does this configuration impact maintenance of a solar installation? So the first part of that question is, as of yet, there is no fully comprehensive list of all these installations. However, as part of the Inspire project that's that NREL is leading from the Department of Energy, we will be putting together that comprehensive list of all those installations. So stay tuned. We do have a paper coming out on this topic within the next couple of months, and then we will have a more comprehensive list of this. To the question of does this configuration, there's been a couple questions of how this, the presence of vegetation or pollinator species would affect the maintenance of the solar equipment. You know, if there's not a clear path way to get to the equipment, or if there's just too much vegetation. And so I think this might be a good question potentially for Laura to talk about their approach for how, if this type of vegetation has impacted any of their O&M activities at all.
So yeah, this is Gavin, guys. Generally, it kind of really depends on whether we're using tracker systems or fixed tilt. But in general, we have had no problem getting equipment kind of in between the rows and getting pretty close. Some of the seed has been placed by hand, kind of directly next to the piles themselves. But in general, we can access, at least for the initial broadcasting and seeding and drilling. As far as maintenance, a lot of the maintenance really comes down to kind of mowing the first few years. It's really all about the establishment years, so you're going to spend a lot of money up front the first 3 to 4 years getting a really good establishment. After that, it really becomes more of a kind of focusing on like individual spots that you may have trouble with certain invasive species coming in, but the maintenance definitely decreases as time goes on, and there's less need for equipment to get in between. But the tracker systems do rotate, you know, so that you can have more room in between the rows. Fixed tilt can be a little more difficult to get underneath them, but we've been able to kind of use the correct type of equipment to get in those areas.
Yeah, and the operations and maintenance for a solar facility this type is actually pretty not very labor intensive. You know, we do an annual service check, so it's someone walking around the site, and we haven't had any issues with vegetation from that. We use string inverters, which are less than 100 pounds, so we don't need to bring a crane in to replace inverters or anything like that. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it's a low-growth native vegetation, and that we haven't had any concerns about it getting in the way of our activities. And obviously, we can maintain the vegetation and then trim it down if it is a problem.
Great, thank you. The next question, I think it would be relevant to, you know, potentially all speakers could address this one, which is, given the variation of vegetation and of different types of agriculture going on all throughout the country and even within individual counties, how do landowner attitudes vary, and what are certain challenges that you've seen in regards to the coexistence of solar projects and agriculture? Rob, do you want to take first cut at that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, I think that just because, like I had highlighted, because people think that they know exactly what a solar array is, there are often people who are maybe neighbors, possibly immediate neighbors or kind of down the road neighbors, who have a negative reaction to when one of the people in their community proposes to use their land for solar. And kind of on a county by county, town by town basis, people are more or less open to being to really understanding how different solar can be developed in their community versus what they think they've understood from the media. So, you know, there are really sophisticated developers like Mortensen and Blattner Energy that are both, you know, very capable of developing solar arrays that, you know, meet and you know, community needs with regards to when a project is actually built, and are, you know, kind of good neighbors. And, you know, both of those firms have done a good job of partnering with vegetation management companies who usually employ people in the community. So that's another way I think that kind of a native vegetation approach can really help build support for solar, is because the people that will be servicing the vegetation really often live within 50 to 100 miles of the project. And so it's important to definitely get their expertise in designing the seed mix and the vegetation management plan. But they often play a key role in in representing kind of the face of the solar development and saying, hey, I'm going to be the one, my company is going to be the one going in there on a regular basis to maintain the vegetation and keep it looking good.
Does the SOCOR team have any additional comments on that?
No, I would say that we've had a positive response from landowners for solar in general because they see it as a way of an additional diverse revenue stream. And the local farmers we work with do tend to recognize the benefits of the native vegetation as well.
And I would say the native vegetation has the tendency to add nutrients to the soil. So in 25 years from now, it's a great plus for them to kind of have a better product than we started with.
So we've had a couple questions also asking about both for prairie grasses, some of which might be dependent upon naturally might be dependent upon fire processes, and then also some other wildfire challenges faced in the western United States. Can you please talk about how you address fire risk, or if that enters your design process at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we've done is by using the larger diversity like pollinator habitat, it definitely mixes between grasses and flowering plants and kind of less. I guess there's a whole trend to maybe just use prairie grasses themselves, which tend to be kind of thicker on the site and kind of more dense, and therefore when you do mow it, the clippings kind of are coming off in larger chunks. In our minds, the current concerns are not really during the growing season. It's during the wildfire seasons like kind of fall and when you would have these concerns. I think our goal is just to kind of watch those areas and watch kind of any kind of buildup that could happen. But I think the density of our planting is much less than I think you would see from just using like a series, a smaller diverse group of 3 or 4 prairie grass seeds. So I think that we are safer in that sense. I definitely think it's a concern and something that needs to be watched. As you're doing maintenance, if you're seeing things collecting in a certain area, it should be something that is part of your maintenance plan. But it doesn't seem to be something that we find extremely concerning with the mixes that we've used thus far.
Yeah, and everything I've heard is about designing mixes with greater amount of flowers and forbs because they retain more water, and thus it's all about having an ecologist that can design a mix that meets your performance characteristics. So every site is different, and make sure that you're talking to an ecologist who can design a mix that meets your needs.
Great. We've had a number of questions that are asking about different types of crops that could potentially be grown in between or underneath solar arrays in different locations. For example, one was asking about in the Middle East or very arid areas. Others are asking about grapes for a vineyard. Others are asking about where the the beehives might be located. I think in many cases, or most cases, the answer is yes, this is possible, and especially in arid areas, building off what Rob mentioned about the water, you actually have the ability to grow additional crops you might not be able to grow because you actually are retaining more moisture in the soil, providing some shade, which would benefit the performance of many of these crops. And we saw this in the research we did with aloe vera in India, as well as the work that Sujit Ravi did on agave in the southwest United States and in Mexico. So I think in many arid areas, your vegetation, and then there's some ongoing work at the University of Arizona at the Biosphere 2 facility too. You will see benefits of having partial shade and increased, lower temperature, soil moisture on crop performance. And something similar was also seen in the University of Massachusetts test plot in the summer of 2016, where in some cases a little bit of shade can help during the heat waves during the summer. And and I think other questions regarding grapes for vineyards or bees, I think the answer is yes, you can grow these as long as you are making sure that you're evaluating what types of shading there might be on the crops, if at all, your access to those agricultural activities, making sure that it's unobstructed and you can get there with the relevant equipment. A next question we have is related to the cost. We have a number of questions on the costs associated with this. So questions like, what's the initial upfront cost difference of using pollinator-friendly species or of low-impact vegetation or low-impact site development for solar? What are the overall cost trade-offs on a more on a life cycle basis, et cetera? And I think the quick answer to that is that some of these things we are evaluating right now as part of this research. There's really a life cycle to see where it goes, but I think potentially the SOCOR team might be able to comment, potentially could be able to comment on some of these initial and ongoing cost trade-offs that they've seen for these pollinator-friendly vegetation mixes.
Yeah, guys, I guess in general, I think the upfront cost, the seed mix themselves is quite expensive, and the labor to install kind of after installation of the arrays as well is kind of a higher price. That installation, you'll see that cost either way. What we're seeing as far as maintenance is pretty equal to kind of what the cost would be to mow a turf grass as to maintain these native vegetation as far as the first 3 to 4 years during the establishment period. But then after that, we're seeing the cost really kind of drop off to less visits per year, and that's where we're really seeing the savings. So it's really kind of further down the line. But I mean, I would say the alternative option, which if you were looking for the absolute cheapest option, I think would kind of what I was mentioning before, a really kind of less diverse prairie grass only, simple kind of low growth prairie grass that just kind of stays close to the ground, needs very little maintenance. The problem there is kind of, I think, what you sort of, everyone kind of alluded to earlier, is the potential for fire risk. And then also just it kind of really adds nothing to the environment, and I think the cost savings, it just really doesn't add up in our mind. And so we've seen also the reduced stormwater. I mean, it doesn't help with the stormwater at all. It really doesn't clean everything as well as far as stormwater runoff. So that's kind of what we've seen as far as costs are concerned. So pollinators are not going to be your absolutely cheapest option. But I think that the delta is so small that I think that it makes more sense to go this direction because of the additional benefits that you'll see. And also, I just think it's really important for us to be a good neighbor if we want to keep developing further and kind of within different counties and states as well.
Yeah, it should really be treated as something new that you can bring to the table in a negotiation and in a conversation with the local authorities. By featuring pollinator habitat that significantly benefits and has shown to increase crop yields, you might be able to save yourself thousands of dollars in developing stormwater retention ponds, or thousands of dollars in screening, or thousands of dollars in having to build berms. So, this is something new that you can add to the conversation and use to potentially achieve cost savings in other areas of the project.
Great. Another question we have is, highlights that there seems to be a lot of development going on in the United States. The question was, how does this compare with activities that are going on elsewhere in the world? And briefly, I would say that there has been a large body of, or not a large, a somewhat large body of research that's been developed in Europe on this topic over the past couple of years, and there's been some good research by Alona Armstrong in the United Kingdom looking at some of these topics of vegetation and impacts on nutrient cycling and microclimate conditions. There has been some work in France looking at how different crops might perform. And then there's been a lot of work on and a lot of examples of solar projects incorporating vegetation and incorporating sheep in in Germany and in Italy especially. And so I think this is still very much an area where we still have to do more and more examples, more and more case studies. I think we're about just as far along as folks are in Europe. I don't know if Rob or Laura, you have any comments on what you've seen on the international front and how the U.S. compares to that?
Yeah, this is Rob. I know that the Solar Trade Association in the United Kingdom sponsored a study that was published last year in this time that showed a significant increase in the abundance and diversity of pollinators on solar sites that were planted with this type of vegetation, native flowering vegetation. And they have dozens and dozens of solar sites in the United Kingdom that have been developed in this manner, and they've been there for quite a few years now. So some very, very large projects are in that way. So we can certainly distribute that study along with the link to the archive and slides.
Great. And there's a question regarding fences. And so many solar projects are covered in fences, which could potentially affect different types of wildlife that could get in or out of the potential habitat beneath the solar arrays. Does the SOCOR team have any comments on fences or wildlife issues you might be facing in your project?
Yeah, the National Electric Code requires us to build a 7-foot chain link fence, and so for code and safety reasons, there's not a whole lot of movement there we can offer.
Okay, yeah, and then I know of definitely other projects, many in California, where they do have, they are required to implement fences, but they've been designing wildlife-friendly fences. So these are fences that will have certain holes that are large enough for certain types of species to get in and out. And so I'm thinking of specifically, you might have some endangered kit foxes or something that would like to have access to the habitat and vegetation beneath the solar panels. So there have been a number of innovations in fence designs and fence technologies to address this free migration of wildlife issue, which is important. Of course, when we're talking about pollinators in this context, bees can easily fly over fences, but when we start talking about larger mammals, that's when you need to have more innovative solutions on those fences. It's definitely an area I think that there have been some innovations, but there's definitely more that could be done.
Yeah, this is Gavin. I think. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gavin.
I just wanted to add a little something. Cause, we have seen a few different situations, like shoot, I think it was in Maryland. We had to kind of raise the fence a few inches off the ground because there was a turtle migration. We turned our detention ponds into like smaller bogs to cater to the turtles. Certain fencing that we're using in Vermont is more deer friendly. That doesn't kind of keeps them from getting wrapped up or tied into it if they were to run into it. So yeah, there's definitely different options out there. So I think it is something that you have to kind of really look at, where your project's located, what around you is something that you should consider. So that's definitely something that we're looking at in specific areas as well.
And I know that that this fencing can certainly be something that helps build public support. So for a wide variety of non-threatened species such as pheasants and other game birds, 100% of the diet of the babies, the chicks, for the first 8 weeks of life is entirely insects. So a pollinator-friendly habitat is just a fantastic place for for pheasants to be foraging, and that can help build support in the local community.
Great. The next question is related to livestock grazing on the solar sites, and the question is, have any specific studies been conducted regarding the grazing of livestock on solar sites, both looking at the ability of the livestock to manage the vegetation as well as the potential agricultural productivity of solar sites in terms of livestock production? I am unaware of any definitive studies that have evaluated these types of questions for livestock, but I will say that it's extremely common. Again, this is in California, North Carolina, and Germany, Italy, many places in Europe too, where the preferred method of vegetation maintenance is through livestock of some sort. Whether it's in that case it's mainly I guess it's sheep grazing in that context, but I think that's their preferred method. So I think that is a good indication that it is a beneficial approach. But it's something that we have not yet looked at. I think a similar question, an extension of this could be looking at cattle, for example, on large areas of public lands, for example. And so this might be, you have a lot of ranching and grazing land on public lands in the West, and there is the potential for, if you have elevated panels, there's the opportunity for cattle to roam. And again, then you might have benefits of shade for that livestock too. But these are areas that I think are still ripe for research, and still areas that would need to be explored much more quantitatively. The next question we have is related to weeds, and it's the question there's been which are related to our farmers concerned about weed proliferation under these types of vegetation and pollinator species solar projects, or what steps are taken to ensure weed control such that it doesn't negatively affect nearby lands.
This is Gavin with SOCOR. I guess our goal is to, if we can get these native plantings established correctly at the very beginning, it really helps to deter invasive species from expanding through the site or to adjacent properties potentially from our site. So that's really been our goal, is just to get everything established correctly. In our experience, we're definitely not adding to the problem, and the maintenance that we are doing on a 3 to 4 time, a growing season has really been able to kind of keep the weeds out of our property. And as the years go on, we should see less and less weed production.
Yeah, and I'd chime in on that as well. Being a farmer requires being, keeping everything in balance, and the issue of weeds is definitely one that can be addressed, as Gavin highlighted, through an appropriate vegetation management plan and seed mix design. But since the 1950s, we've lost more than 50% of our honeybee population, and there is a real crisis in the number of pollinators that are available to service crops, and the pollinators are necessary for 70% of crops. So any conversation about the native vegetation needs to be very mindful of being sure that we manage weeds and can eliminate that, and that's an achievable thing, while at the same time significantly increasing the acreage available for wild and managed pollinators.
And this is Gavin. I will just add that I think the more diverse your seed mix is, just the better chance you have of kind of deterring weeds. What we're really seeing is kind of weeds have the chance to come in if your seed mix is not diverse enough to kind of handle the changing climate change throughout the different years or seasons. Whenever a certain large species kind of has trouble that year, then you'll see a lot of invasive species coming in. By having a really large diversity, you can really keep that at bay throughout kind of any conditions that may arise.
So the next question is related to safety, and the question is, are there any safety concerns for people going in between the panels, whether it's for managing the vegetation or for agricultural crops? Is there any concern because the project is energized?
I guess this is Gavin. What I would really say is that we would always assume, like when you're out there working, assume everything's live and really try to touch things as least as possible. But we really follow kind of all the, there's no wires that are down near the areas of concern. For us, it's really just kind of being smart about it and understanding what how the system works before you enter the site, regardless of whether you're a contractor or someone who's managing the vegetation. So it's really about education and just kind of being smart. But there isn't a lot of the wires that are exposed that you should be hitting with a weed eater or a mower. Everything is buried underground, or it's in a tray table that's carried across above the ground. So it should be pretty obvious certain areas that you should and shouldn't touch or be in contact with.
Great, and we just have a couple questions left. There seem to be a lot of questions related to people that are interested in learning more about this. I think I can speak for all of us when I say you should feel free to reach out to any of us with additional questions you might have, or if you're interested in potentially being a partner as part of this study or learning more, you can feel free to contact me, Jordan, at the National Renewable Energy Lab. But then we have our contact information here, so feel free to reach out to us with additional questions or much more specific questions about the individual things that we've talked about. Otherwise, I think the next question that we have is, are there any state or national grants or award programs that you are aware of that would help promote either agricultural entities or solar entities implementing these pollinator-friendly solar arrays?
This is Rob, and so while I think that this is certainly helping to, I guess, save the bees is certainly an endeavor worthy of considerable charitable support. As we've discussed, I think there's plenty of room to fit a pollinator-friendly seed mix into the existing private financing for these projects. That said, there are a number of initiatives at the national and state level that help support the development of pollinator-friendly acres. The White House highlighted in its report that nearly 7 million acres of pollinator habitat was needed in order to reverse or delay the declining population in bees and monarchs. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the solar industry to provide a very meaningful contribution in support of that goal, particularly when you consider the alternative is a turf grass or a gravel condition. So these are sites we're already going to be going in. We may as well be at the least designing them in a way that benefits agriculture with a pollinator mix, and there's certainly more opportunities for other uses as well with regards to grazing and specific crops. But the NRCS, the National Conservation Reserve, Jordan, do you know the NRCS? It's I believe a division of the USDA, but they have some resources and funds available for pollinator habitat projects.
Yeah, great. A next question is related to the use of solar that's produced from these sites, and the question is when solar is implemented on individual agricultural operations, is that energy used on-site or is it sent directly to the grid? If it's used on-site, what is it used for? And I think the answer to that is it's mixed. In some cases, you might have some direct use of that solar on-site to help offset demands, and this could be, certainly for dairy operations, which have a high and pretty continuous electricity load. It can help be used directly on-site, but we are also seeing a lot, and many times it's just easier to connect it directly to the grid, and then work out an arrangement between the farmer and the electric utility to develop that arrangement. But there's a variations, and it depends on where you are. It depends on individual situations. What makes the most economic sense? What makes the most sense given grid stability issues as well? So I think there's a lot of variation in there. I guess the next question is related to conservation districts, and I think this somewhat talks, is relevant to what Rob was talking about. But what are the, to what extent is Fresh Energy or solar industry working with local soil conservation groups? Not necessarily the federal ones, but maybe state level soil conservation groups.
Yeah, so we definitely work hard to share information and share the concept. Minnesota established kind of a first step in starting the conversation around what constitutes pollinator-friendly vegetation mix that obviously has significant stormwater and soil benefits as well. And that's a fantastic start and a great minimal, minimal threshold for these projects to be considered pollinator-friendly. But I think there's great opportunity for soil and water conservation districts when a solar array is proposed to partner with that solar developer and say, okay, you'll make sure that the project meets the minimum threshold for pollinator-friendly. We'd like to collaborate with you to take it from meeting the standard to from, if you will, from a silver to a gold, or from a silver to a platinum. So there's great opportunities for partnerships, I think, between soil and conservation districts in every state and private developers. That's a great opportunity, I think, as well for savvy solar developers to create new and strong relationships in those communities. Oftentimes, soil and conservation districts have very specific and rigorous goals that they have to hit. I know that in Maryland they have a TMDL, total maximum daily load, of sediment and nutrients that can go into the Chesapeake Bay, and so every county has a plan around how to address those goals, and solar can play a part in that. And I think that both it's on solar developers to reach out. It's also on the soil and conservation leaders to reach out to projects when they're proposed in their communities.
Great, yeah, and I know there's been a lot of good work done in Massachusetts as well with Hyperion Systems in the University of Massachusetts in conjunction with those soil conservation districts. So there's been a lot of good efforts throughout the nation on some of that interaction. So I think we're running out of questions, which I think is good. I think there's a lot of questions, which I think were really illuminating. Still, the most common question we've received is, will these slides and will this presentation be made available? And the answer is yes. And we will be sending an email out shortly after this webinar with links to where you can find the slides and the recording of the webinar itself. So I think on behalf of Laura and Rob, I would love to say thank you very much to the participants for listening to the webinar, as well as providing us with a suite of really intriguing questions. We really appreciate it. I think, again, we would love to hear direct feedback as well. Feel free to reach out and contact us for any other additional questions that come up as you're thinking about this, or as you're reviewing the slides that we'll send out. So thank you very much. Rob or Laura, do you have any last comments?
I really appreciate the opportunity and you convening this important conversation, and frankly, just to share more and more information about the significant and meaningful agricultural benefits that solar sites can provide in situations where they're established. So, thank you for the convening conversation and helping us share this useful information.
Thank you very much, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yep, great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.